Sugar Daddy Podcast, yo. Learn how to make them pockets grow. Financial freedom's where we go. Smart investments, money flow.
Hey, babe, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about something that I think every mother, parent, working person, especially working person with a family, feels deeply in their soul. And that is that second shift, that mental load, the 5 to 9 after working a 9 to 5, the, oh my gosh, who's going to do the tooth fairy money? What about the goodie bags for the classroom party? The crap that inundates our minds. That is what we're talking about today. And before you're like, no, I don't want to hear about it because I live that, we are going to be talking about it with the one and only Eve Rodsky. I'm over here freaking fangirling because I read her New York Times best-selling book, Fair Play, when we had a 1-year-old and we were drowning. And then we found out we were pregnant. And then we were in a pandemic with 2 under 2. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do we come up from air? And Eve really, really helped us come up for air. And so, Eve, we are so thrilled to have you with us today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here, and it's been fun to listen to you, and I love your banter, and I'm just happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think, partially our banter is because we're still happily married. Because thanks to your book, we figured it out. You helped us get there. So thank you so much. For anybody who is not familiar with Eve's work, let's get into this incredible bio because you really have put in the work for this book and to help families come up for air and really figure out a system that works in their home. And it's all about equity, not equality. I think we all realize nothing will ever be equal in a home, but we can find equity between the roles, whether you're in a heteronormative relationship or otherwise. Finding what works for you. All of our relationships, of course, are our own and they're personal, but you've really put a system in place to help us figure that out. So let's get into this bio and then we'll follow up with your money memory and get into how this all came to be. Okay?
Perfect.
Eve Rodsky transformed a blueberries breakdown into a catalyst for social change when she applied her Harvard-trained background in organizational management to ask the simple yet profound question, what would happen if we treated our homes as our most important organizations? Her New York Times best-selling book and Reese's Book Club pick, Fair Play, a gamified life management system that helps partners rebalance their domestic workload and reimagine their relationship, has elevated the cultural conversation about the value of unpaid labor and care. Whew, so much unpaid labor. In her highly anticipated follow-up, Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World, she explores the cross-section between the science of creativity, productivity, and resilience. Described as the antidote to physical, mental, and emotional burnout, Rodsky aims to inspire a narrative around the equality of time and the individual right to personal time choice that influences sustainable and lasting change on a policy level. Her work is backed by Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon's media company, whose mission is to change the narrative for women through storytelling. Rodsky was born and raised by a single mom in New York City and now lives in LA with her husband Seth and their 3 children. Welcome, Eve. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that bio.
Oh, how do you feel about it? It's a big bio. You should be so proud.
I actually feel more aligned with your statement about raising children during the pandemic. That's what really triggered me. Yes. It was a hard time.
It was. It was a hard time for so many of us. And I'll tell you, I'm an audiobook girl through and through. If I read a book, I'm going to fall asleep. So I have to do Audible or audio. And when I heard your voice talk about the blueberry breakdown, when I tell you, I don't know that I've ever felt so seen in my entire life. So for anybody who is an audio book person, I cannot recommend Fair Play enough because it really is just like the conversations that you have with your girlfriends around just all the stuff, the never ending to-do list. And so we're going to get into that blueberry breakdown because that is,
Sorry,
I know that's
Brandon.
really the catalyst. I know it really is the catalyst for this extraordinary journey you've been on. But before we get there, raised with a single mom, I'm sure you have an incredible first money memory. Can you walk us through that?
Oh, absolutely. My first money memory was getting an eviction notice under the door. We lived in a place called Stuyvesant Town, which is a rent-stabilized, sort of middle-class, working-class housing project in Alphabet City in New York City. And I remember my mother worked nights. She was a teacher, a professor, so she worked nights, and I would be home with my younger brother, and I remember a blue piece of paper being pushed under our door. And what I remember about the eviction notice was I think I was a relatively new reader. I must have been like third grade. And all I could, as a young reader, process was something that said, you will be, basically out of a home. And so I didn't understand the context that my mother was overwhelmed with all the unpaid labor and that she just had forgotten to pay our bills, or that, she was paying rent on credit card debt. But I didn't have the context for that. All I thought when I saw that blue piece of paper was that we were going to be homeless. And so that was probably my first and one of my most formative money memories.
I mean, that being able to read part of that notice even, that would definitely be formative. What do you think you have gained, or how has that shown up in your life today and the work that you thought you would do? Obviously you are a Harvard-trained attorney by background. You don't get there without hard work. So did you have like a moment where you were like, this is never going to happen in my adult life? Or have you ever broken that down?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was absolutely formative. I did not want to be my mother. And until Fair Play, and I really started to understand and become an expert on the gender division of labor, Jess. Yeah, I'm an expert on the gender division of labor, Brandon. Not probably your most anticipated podcast to have to sit through or talk to me about.
It is.
But that wasn't on my third grade, what do you want to be when you grow up board, right? To be an expert on the gender division of labor. But it all actually started with, the explosion of having a mother who did it all and saying that I didn't want that life, and trying to build a life where I had an equal partner, and then watching that completely break down in shame and exhaustion. I did everything to try to be the antithesis of a single mother raising two children, working nights. And I thought I had built that partnership until, as you said, Jess, I had a lot of breakdowns, but one that was really memorable, which I write about in Fair Play, as you said, my blueberries breakdown.
The blueberries breakdown. Well, thank you for sharing that formative memory, because that, I'm sure, was hard to process then, and even reflecting now. That's, these memories shape us and they stay with us. And then having your own children, you're like, I'm going to do it different, which is a whole nother added level of stress that I think any parent who strives to be a good parent and do better, know better for their kids, deals with on a daily basis. So thank you for sharing that.
And later with the Fair Play cards, I just want to say I want to play something with you. Remind me, I want to play the game.
Oh, I've got them right here. Perfect.
The therapists have been using them in a way that sort of helps us tell some of those stories that you ask about. So I was thinking when I was listening to you about money memories, I was like, ooh, I want to just ask them a question later on, but not yet. Sorry, Brandon, you go.
Let's do it.
No, I was just going to say that I always find it very interesting to hear people's stories of being raised by more than likely a single parent, but most often a single mother, because I was raised by a single mom as well. She raised my brother and I, but I'm so, blessed and lucky that finances was not an issue in our household, thankfully. Mm-hmm. So it's, looked very different. I would say that my upbringing was much better than probably most people that have two parents. And it's just always interesting to hear, those dynamics of what happens, with a single parent. Now, granted, I know she was overwhelmed. I know she had the same problems that your mother probably had from being overwhelmed because they're doing everything outside of just working.
Yeah. But
I think that's the key.
What really resonated, and I'm sure you would say this too, is even when you have great spouses like Seth or like a Brandon, sometimes it's still not enough, right? Because we're missing that foundation of a system in our home. And so that, I think, is really what spoke to me in the book, is that, no, I have a husband who does laundry. I have a husband who'll empty the dishwasher. I have a husband who'll do my daughter's hair or our daughter's hair. How is that not enough? And then, my heart breaks for the people who don't have that and are really, really doing it all. But putting that system in place really is so, so important. So can we kick it off with the blueberries breakdown?
Before we get to that real quick, I do want to, specify to the men out there, you have to be open to having this conversation and not taking it as criticism or an attack on you.
Yes.
So please listen to this podcast without getting upset. Just be open to the idea of, making your relationship better.
That's a good call out.
Thanks, Brandon. What I will say is that I had this one CEO who said to me, I got through your book, which I was like, oh, thank you for saying that. And he said, and the reason why I got through the whole thing was because the first half, I thought I was going to put it down because it was so full of anger, but the second half is so full of solutions. And I was like, well, thank you for accepting female anger. I appreciate you getting through it. But again, I do think that if you stay along with us, some of this will go dark, but then we do go light, because the good news is that fair play works. The systems work. The only way to end bias, as we know, one of the best ways is structured decision making. So we're going to talk about how great it is when you have tools to make things more efficient. You get time back. But I do think it's important to give context, which is anger and sadness, which is exactly where, sort of that blueberries breakdown starts.
Yeah. Let's get into it. Don't listen to this podcast and then not read the book. Read the book, because it is a gem of a book, and then get the cards as well. But we'll get into that.
Thank you. Look, for me, again, as I said, I did not aspire to be an expert on the gender division of labor. It was not what I had written, in my "What do you want to be when you grow up" board in elementary school. It wasn't, in fact, what I answered when Elizabeth Warren, she was our orientation teacher before she was a senator from Massachusetts in law school. And she asked us, Jess and Brandon, what do we want to do with your law degree? And without sarcasm, I legitimately said something like President of the United States, Senator from New York, and Nick City dancer, and preferably all at the same time, because it was sort of that Legally Blonde era where, it's hard. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out it is really hard. But so in 1999, when I said that, I thought, I'd be smashing all these glass ceilings. And then, if you really look at my life when I had the blueberries breakdown in 2011, basically 10 years later, the only thing I can actually, legitimately say I was smashing, was like peas for my toddler, Zach, while nursing a newborn baby, while desperately trying to grasp at straws to hold on to a corporate job that didn't want me back, that gave away my direct reports and told me if I wanted to breastfeed, it would have to be in a supply closet. And that in context is important, because that is the context in which I was operating. A workplace that abandoned me, my dreams that I thought I was going to have 10 years earlier sort of, by the wayside. And then on top of it, sort of the person closest to me, my husband, Seth, as I was racing to get my toddler from a toddler transition program, which in America, they last like 7 minutes and they cost our entire salaries, around this time sends me this text that says, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And if it wasn't for that context, yes, I don't think, without the context, it's understandable, especially to men, why that would have caused an entire movement, not just a book. But at the time, what happened to me was when I got the "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries" text, I pulled over to the side of the road, which we don't do lightly in LA because of traffic. And I was late to pick up Zach, that toddler. And I just sat there crying. And I was crying not just because Seth was ascribing to me that I was the fulfiller of his smoothie needs, but I think what I was really crying for was that I was the default. I started to feel like there was no end to this mess of a tunnel that I was in, where I was the default, or as I call in Fair Play, the she-fault, for literally every single household task for my family. And what I realized was I was living a statistic, Jess and Brandon, that I didn't even know at the time, which is that women shoulder 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, regardless of whether they work outside the home. And actually, the amount of invisible, unpaid work that they handle increases as the money they make increases. And so we know this is not a work problem, this is a gender problem. And so that breakdown on the side of the road, I think back now to that day, and even if I hadn't created the Fair Play system, even if I didn't have an institute that's fighting for paid leave and childcare and to make things easier for all of families, even without that, if I had just known that statistic that I wasn't alone, that other women shouldered 2/3 or more of what it took to run a home and family, I think I would have been in a better place.
Yeah, especially when you have young children and you're working, and whether you're career oriented or not, whether you're in a corporate lifestyle or not, there's so much about motherhood, especially, that's so isolating, even when you know you're not alone. And so when I listened to that book and I was thinking, this is a Harvard trained attorney. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were talking about, you had file folders on your lap, you had the breast pump next to you. And then, here's the audacity of Seth asking you about the blueberries. And it's like, oh my God, I felt the rage.
Yeah, he chose violence that day.
I felt the rage,
like,
because
what else can I do for you, Seth? What else can I fucking do for this family?
She knows I would never send her that text, only because there might be things that you think in your head, but then like you got to take a second and pause. Like, yeah, this is probably not going to come through the way that I would like
even
it to.
if you had just walked out of the grocery store, right? It's that context of what you described about, feeling rejected at work, and just, there's just so much that goes into.
And let me tell you one other area I was rejected. So around that time, or maybe even like the day after, I had the rejection from work. And as you said, I'm trying to start a new law firm with all these, papers on my lap. I have Seth with this bizarrely passive aggressive that Brandon wouldn't send texts. I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. Okay, so that means, right, like I failed you, right? Or whatever that the context of that was, which was so frustrating. But at the same time, I was actually very hopeful because I had just started that toddler transition program I was telling you about. That's where I was on the way to when I had the breakdown. And that's where people told me it was going to get easier. Guys, I don't know if you felt that way too, but people said to me, like, when you get to school, you're going to start having a community. You're going to have people who help you. You'll have more time. And so when I get to the school, not only am I being failed by my husband and my workplace, but I get to the school and the preschool teacher echoes, welcome to the transition program. We're all happy to see you here. These are going to be people around you that are going to be friends for your lifetime. They're going to know you better than anyone's ever known you. And then as she's saying this, I'm looking down at my name tag, and my name tag says Zach's mom.
Talk about not having an identity.
These people are going to be the people who know me better than anyone's ever known me.
Is this
they don't even know my name.
This is definitely must be an LA thing, because
but that's just like icing on the terrible shit cake at that point. That's
exactly.
terrible.
It was this idea that there was no identity for me outside of being Zach's mom or the fulfiller, like I said, of my husband's smoothie needs. And I think it echoes research that now, we have 10 years later, that women constantly in 33 territories and countries where fair play exists, and we have data, say to me that they don't believe they have a permission to be unavailable from their roles as a parent, partner, and or professional. And it breaks my heart.
It is heartbreaking because it's so much pressure. It's so much. I mean, think about what we do, and I'll speak for women in heteronormative relationships, but what we do when we are sick, when we have a fever, when we have a migraine, when we don't feel good, compared to, no offense, what men do. I mean,
I don't get sick often.
He doesn't get sick often,
Yes,
but there are times where he'll be like, babe, do I have a fever? And I'm like,
yes.
all right,
You're
all
fine.
right. I'm like, suck it up, Buttercup. You'll be okay. You're going to make it.
Well, for me, like, when I get sick, since I don't get sick often,
He does get sick.
I get sick.
Yeah. But it's still,
I try
I'm
to
saying.
head it off.
You know what I'm saying. The man flu is a thing.
Yeah,
so.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. Let's transition from the blueberries breakdown into what happened, because it lit a fire in you. And now you've got, 2 best-selling books. You've got an entire institute of research behind you, decades of experience. What happened after Zach's mom and the name tag?
Well, I put my researcher hat on because, as you kindly said, I'm a lawyer and a researcher, and I decided that I would start to understand what was happening to me. And one of the best things that happened around that time that I write about in Fair Play that Jess knows was because of the blueberries breakdown, I was more open to see what was happening around me. And so I write about this experience right after that, where I'm at this breast cancer march for a friend who had been recently diagnosed, and being with very powerful women. We had like a stroke and trauma doctor there, like a award-winning producer. And they're not all married to men, but the ones who were, I was more aware of all of us. It was a Saturday morning. So that's extra hard because you're leaving little kids, somewhere and at home and asking for childcare. And so we're all together at this march on a Saturday morning. And then around noon, everyone gets really quiet. And we were supposed to be going to lunch. And then I start hearing like moans like, oh, I probably should get home. I'm going to skip lunch. And so then I start to look over people's shoulders, the women I'm with, and I'm like, ooh, what's happening over here? And what I realized was that the women married to men were responding to text and phone calls. And they were text and phone calls like, where did you put Hudson's soccer bag? What's the address of the birthday party? Did you want me to take, Lily, and did you bring me a gift? Where's Anna's pants? Questions like that. But my favorite question that I screenshot and I had on a bulletin board for a really long time was my friend Kate's husband. Remember, this is noon on a Saturday, and his text said to her, "Do the kids need to eat lunch?"
It's just, I cannot wrap my head around it. I cannot.
I don't even know what to say because they're just these guys are just making all of us look bad.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And remember, it's also, this is 2012. So, I do believe we've made progress, but back then, nobody was talking about these issues. There was not even social media in any meaningful way. But what was fascinating to me was that was my first act of resistance, because Jess and Brandon, you're asking me about, what happened after. I got to take some power back, because even though those women weren't willing to stay to eat the dim sum and stay for lunch because they left their partners with too much to do, and so they did leave me to go bring a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party and find Hudson's soccer bag. But what I did ask for them to do is count up how many phone calls and texts we had received. And it was pretty jarring. It was 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. And so that day was a day that I felt less shame, because even these strong women that I really admired were going through the same thing that I was. And so I felt like, oh my God, if none of us are immune to these issues, then maybe this is a bigger problem. And so that's when the researcher hat really came on to understand that this phenomenon that we're talking about had a name. a couple names actually: the second shift, unpaid labor, emotional labor, cognitive labor, and invisible work. That was my favorite one, Jess and Brandon, because it came from 1986, an article I read. And the woman, the sociologist, was arguing that unfortunately, she didn't believe that women's work in the home would ever be visible because visibility in our society equals value. And if we gave value to the unpaid labor, we'd have to pay for it or we'd have to acknowledge it. And the invisibility is what is allowing America to have women as our social safety net. And that is something that we need for a capitalist patriarchy to thrive. And so she argued that we would never make the invisible visible. So then I got mad at her and said, well, I'm going to make the invisible visible. And I started with the Should I Do spreadsheet. And that's how Fair Play began, with a giant Excel spreadsheet of 98 tabs and 2,000 items of invisible work I compiled over a year from women married to men, now in 17 countries, that basically ask the question, what is invisible to your partner that you may be doing that they don't see?
Mm-hmm. An Excel spreadsheet with 98 tabs.
I know. The entire book, I mean, I binged it. I think it took me, I think I finished it in 2 or 3 days. And I mean.
Yeah, because as soon as she was done, she was like, we need to talk.
Yeah. Like, we're going to have a conversation. But, again, because of the systems, and this is something we're going to be revisiting over and over again, right? As our children get older, as our goals change. Yes.
It's a practice. It's practice. Absolutely.
But I will tell you, I was changing the laundry earlier, and I was so impressed because Brandon did the towels. You're probably like, where is she going? Yeah, I'm wondering. And all of the hand towels were in there. The kitchen towels were in there. The kids' bathroom hand towels. When we got married 8 years ago, I don't know that Brandon would have washed a hand towel. They just magically are always clean and always ready to go and perfectly folded.
As a single man, I don't think I had hand towels.
Well, let's
right. Paper towels.
Right. Yes. So, but I mean, I literally had a cognitive moment of like every single hand, like I know which hand towel goes in which bathroom. And I had a moment of, oh my gosh, it clicked. He's got it. When we do towels, we do all the towels. When we do the bath mats, we do all the bath mats. So, ladies,
exactly. That is hope. It.
Yes.
The point is, as Brandon, as you see from systems, is first of all, there's lots. Fair Play is a love letter to men. It became a love letter to men because we'll talk about how painful it is for men to be helpers and not partners. It's just not sustainable to have no context for what's happening in your own home. And so I think there's a lot of pain for men as well. But I will say that men, when they understand after, again, interviewing them for 10 years, that one, Robert Waldinger has a TED Talk that's the most watched TED Talk, I think, of all time. It's about 75 years of a longitudinal study of men's health and well-being. Men are alive regardless of smoking, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status. They control for all of that. Men are alive at 85 if they have quality relationships at 55. Quality relationships at 55 with Jess are going to be cemented in the spaces in between, in the small things, and folding a hand towel is one of those.
Oh, I
That's
know her.
a love language.
I know her love language.
Yes, it is a love language.
Yes, it matters. And it shows.
But I will tell you, love languages always bothered me. Love languages bothered me because I asked people about them, and women who did not have acts of service never said anything else. It wasn't like a woman was like, I want Brandon to leave all the crap on the floor and disrespect my time, but he can buy me like a charm bracelet. It was always, it was like a Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah, it was always acts of service. The only women who chose something else were ones who already assumed that acts of service were sort of part of the relationship. Yes. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I will say that is the key to the should I do was the opposite of a love letter to men, because at that time, the only advice I could find on dividing up domestic labor was make a list.
Mm. And if I have to make the list and tell you what to do, it defeats the purpose.
So I have a question.
But at the time, that's what it was. And I did send list to Seth and it didn't work well. Okay, Brandon, yes, go.
So in the research that you've done over, numerous years, have you found any information that correlates with like how a man was, how a man grew up and like how his home growing up was as far as, labor, whether that's, two parents, a single parent raised by a mother, and how that maybe dictates how they are as an adult when it comes to that stuff?
It's so interesting because I thought I would see a difference. Like I thought, well, maybe men of single mothers were more used to helping out around the house. We haven't, I mean, again, this is just a qualitative. We do have a quantitative study that showed fair play works. So that's very exciting. We just did a big study with a big health company in USC. But I don't have a quantitative study about that, Brandon. But what I thought was very interesting, the only thing I could see in the qualitative interviews over 10 years was that second-born men were a little bit more likely to already do domestic labor before fair play.
Oh,
so
interesting.
firstborns, yeah, it was interesting. Firstborn men felt a little bit more tricky than the secondborn, but that was the only relationship. I mean, that was the only personal system I could find, and I think you know why that is, because I think masculinity is so global. In terms of what is expected of men, this idea that you have to be the breadwinner, that you have to be strong, you have to be a protector for your family, that you're not allowed to show weakness. So I think in general, some of those themes overrode what we saw in terms of individual family circumstance.
Interesting.
It's a good question though, because, and I'm, as you said, the second born, I'm like thinking about our brothers and I'm like, I don't know about that, but
right, exactly. It was only, like I said, it was a very small, thing that we observed, but nothing. Yeah. What we saw, I think, in terms of generally what we saw, and was the most important. So I'll just skip to what we saw because I think it's important because it does help answer that question. We saw that most men. We're coming from some type of assumption. As one woman said to me, she said fair play taught her, this is one of my favorite lines, that she didn't have a magical vagina that whispered in her ear what her husband's mother wants for Christmas.
Oh my God.
So
Can we get that on a t-shirt?
That magical vaginas thinking was sort of there, again, like I said, across the board. What was most interesting was the people who are most receptive. So the should I do list, as you can imagine, when I sent it to Seth after a year of compiling, can't wait to discuss, didn't go over well with him. He basically just sent me back the pixelated, like, see no evil monkey emoji, like, what is this, crap you're sending me? But what did work for him was when I started to apply my day job to what I was doing. So when I realized a list didn't work, what I've always told my clients, and because my day job is I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession, which you should feel bad for me, but I create these very complex governance systems so that families can have grace and humor and generosity around difficult, complex organizational family decisions. And so when I realized, what if the thing that's missing in this conversation is not, the psychologists who say use I statements, men are from Mars, whatever, women are from Venus. It's not the economists who are talking over here about the cost of childcare. Those are both important. But what if we're missing a middle ground here, which maybe as a lawyer, no one's ever really looked at this as a lawyer, but lawyers are the ones who design behaviors for societies, Jess and Brandon, right? I mean, if you don't want someone to vote in Georgia, you're not going to be like, excuse me, use an I statement to tell them not to vote. I don't think you should vote. No, you're going to pass a law telling them not to, make it harder for them to vote. If you want people to stop at a stop sign, you're going to pass a law. So I kept thinking, well, what about my governance background? Like the laws I give for families, the roadmaps of laws, they're called bylaws. What if I created that for my own family? And so that became, when I realized the list didn't work for Seth, and the Should I Do spreadsheet was a wonderful exercise for me, and it did make the invisible visible, I kept thinking maybe what I need to do with this list is turn it into a system. And so that was the question that changed my life, which is a question I postulated in 2012, which was, what if we start to treat our homes as our most important organizations? And what I would say is that, getting back to this, a long answer to Brandon's question, when I start to look at this as an organizational management question, that it's you and your partner against the organization, that you're, partners in an organization, the people who believe in organizational systems, the men who believed in that, whether they were firstborn or secondborn or single mother, they were the ones who were most interested first. And so typically it was coaches and military men, which I thought was really interesting. People who understood the systems of the military, and also coaches who understood that know your role. Like, you're not going to put your point guard in for your center unless, I guess, it's LeBron James and you can play any position. But typically there are systems, they're used to working in systems. So those were the men that actually, regardless of their home structure, it was the work that they did that made them most receptive to be a beta tester. For people who believed in systems, they were willing to give me a shot.
That's interesting.
I love a system. I love a system. I love a standard operating procedure.
Yes,
I love,
exactly.
I love that. So
I'm a creature of habit, so a system there, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So, but the good thing about habits, as we know from Atomic Habits, because I've spoken at conferences with James Clear, is that systems, when you practice them enough, become habits. So that's very exciting.
Yes. We listened to that book together, actually, on a road trip.
Oh,
which
yeah.
was very
Yeah.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're talking about systems. So the boundaries, the systems, the communications, all of that led to CPE. Am I skipping anything before we get to CPE?
No.
Because I know that's the most important part of all of this.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
Well, so I'll just give you a bit of context. And again, you could always, edit this out. But I like to give context. I think it actually helps men understand how much rigor went into this. It's not just some random person being like, you should help out your wife more, right?
Right.
So what I was looking for was data. And so once I realized, okay, the home is an organization, then I realized, well, okay, so if I'm your producer, Jess and Brandon, I come to you and I say, hey guys, what should I be doing today? I'm just going to wait here to tell me what to do, right? We know that doesn't fly in the workplace. It doesn't even fly in my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group, where you would say, in that group, there are clear systems. You don't bring snack twice on your snack day, you're out.
Wow.
So the only place I could find where we were still using 3 toxic words, which were, we're going to figure it out, were the home. And so I had to start to think about what would it look like to design a system if it's true that the home is an organization. And to design any system, you have to have the right data. So I started to go to couples, and I would say with my spreadsheet, which is now the Fair Play cards, who handles summer breaks for your kids? Oh, we both do. Who does grocery shopping? We both do. Who does couple social plans? We both do. And so it was a very funny, I love that you're raising your hand. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so I would hear this chiming in of we both do these things. So I couldn't get accurate data. Finally, after interviewing, now I've been able to ask this question in 17 countries. And so we know that in the Nordic countries, in South America, in mainland China, it's always the same. Women married to men have a certain pattern. And the only way I was able to break that both trap to get the actual data of what's happening in heterosexual relationships was to ask the transformational question of my lifetime, which was, how does mustard get in your refrigerator?
And it's so good, which is
Brandon,
so funny.
Yes. Because
he's the mustard eater, but it gets in the fridge because of me.
Yes. Well,
are you shaking your head? Are we about to have a fight in front of Eve?
That is inaccurate.
No.
Okay.
Well, let's okay, but let's explain why that question was so confounding. Similar to, you just had a reaction to it, because a lot of people have this reaction to that.
Because Brandon's blatantly lying on our podcast right now.
Well, it's not that he's lying. What happens is that when you don't actually break it down into the project management steps of what that one act is. Remember, it's one act in one groceries card of 100 cards, which is the Fair Play system now. So what I was able to do by breaking it down, I could go to each country and pick the condiment of choice. It wasn't always mustard. And what was happening was women and men they didn't combat it. They would say, yes, this is what my wife does. She's the one in the project management hierarchy. She's the one conceiving of the fact that yellow mustard is in our refrigerator because our second son, Johnny, only will eat protein with yellow mustard. Otherwise, he won't eat protein. So then all of a sudden I got consensus on data. Women are shouldering the conception. And then I'm looking for planning, which is another organizational management step. So I would say who asks for stakeholder buy-in for what you need for the grocery list? I didn't actually use the word stakeholder buy-in, but you get what I'm getting at. So then when I ask about stakeholder buy-in, who's serving the family for stakeholder buy-in and who's monitoring the mustard for when it runs low, not, hey, babe, we're out of mustard, but actually is monitoring it, similar to the beautiful hand towel that it just keeps rotating and it's there, or toilet paper. Shout out to Brandon for that. So when you're monitoring that for when it's running low, that is a planning phase. And then I got to why we have the both trap, because men do participate in the mustard because they go to the store to go get it. And then, what happens is, and this is why Fair Play became a love letter to men. A lot of times, without context, a man will go to the store because they're just doing the execution. They're bringing home spicy Dijon every fucking time, Brandon. And I asked you for yellow.
We're not a yellow mustard
and then
at all.
But Johnny only eats that with his protein.
Right, exactly. And so what is happening? And so the yellow's not there. And then what women would whisper to me is, Eve, I see, you have on this Excel spreadsheet estate planning. You want me to trust my husband with my living will? He can't even bring home the right type of mustard. And so that's when I realized that the home was eroding the only two things you need for a successful organization. These interactions over and over, as a mediator and a lawyer, we always say the presenting problem is not the real problem. So obviously it's not actually about mustard. What it's about is that when you have these interaction of one person holding all the context and the cognitive labor of conception and planning, and the other person coming in and execution, accountability and trust start eroding. And if you don't have accountability and trust, you don't have an organization. And so that's where this idea of CPE staying together was born. Because in a workplace, when you just have execution, again, the love letter to men is that you lose something called psychological safety. So the person who's just executing has no context, so they don't feel safe. So often that person retreats, or they will feel like, I can't do anything right in this job. And then often I would hear that from men, not that I don't want to help, but like, what's the point if I can't do anything right? And so then I start to feel really bad for men, and I start to call this not nagging, but a rat infestation. And a rat infestation of a home, nobody wants their home infested with rats, was a random assignment of a task. And I realized that men in these 17 countries, even the Nordic countries, were mostly doing execution on their wives' cognitive labor, which obviously is terrible for women because it burns us out. And that's what my new study shows, my quantitative study. But it's terrible for men too, because they lose psychological safety in their most important organization of the home. And so that's why it's really us against the cards. It's us against a figure it out mentality, because that's what a figure it out mentality does for you. An ownership mentality is what fair play is. An ownership mentality is you do all the towels. Well, you told me to put this in the dryer. Okay, that's one towel from the swim. Like I said towels. Like, do you not know the towels upstairs? And so then we start giving feedback in the moment. We use nail the chalkboard type tone. A person retreats. And so we end up not being able to communicate, because then you say, well, I can't communicate about domestic life. It's too triggering. And so then all of a sudden we are in this accountability and trust spiral where I don't trust him to do X, so I might as well do it myself. And then the resentment increases. So really, there's a very simple solution. And that solution is to move to an ownership mindset. Sadly, because of expectations and, religion and many things that have kept women in the home for so long, it was easier said than done, Jess and Brandon, because I thought I was delivering this beautiful logical system to the world.
You did, but it's hard.
Thank you.
It's hard.
But it was so painful for people. It was so painful for people to get through the first part of Fair Play that it took us 5 years to actually get data from people that they were consistently able to actually talk about the cards, to even bring them up. It was so painful. And I don't think I was anticipating how much pain would be there. And that was my bad. I am a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist. So I'm just like, just do what's efficient, move into the efficiency, adopt systems. And unfortunately, it wasn't, it wasn't so easy. But that's why, guess what?
But it's change management.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're totally changing and rewiring how the house works, because and thankfully, I was going to say to that earlier part of the conversation, I knew instantly when I took this to Brandon and I said, we've got to have a system. I feel like I'm drowning. I knew he would hear me and I knew he would care. And I do think a lot of that comes from the fact that he saw his mom doing everything. And so he doesn't want that to be what happens in our home. But I also know that there are many women who do not have that kind of support. And so for that, I was always thankful. I do think as a type A OCD person who really likes control and somebody who does trust her partner, it is really difficult to let go of some of those things. And there's also that element of, all right, if I let him do this, then he gets to do it his way. Now, if we want to put some sort of boundary or scope around how it's done, hey, I wash the towels on hot. We rinse them twice. We talk about it, right? Like now there's a system. And again, ding, ding, it clicked, right? I saw that today. But it's still hard to let go of that control or the mindset of, if I have to tell you how to do it, I'll just do it myself. Because I did that for years. And that's where the exhaustion and the burnout comes from is, well, if I have to make you a list, if I have to. And so we had a moment this year at our son's birthday party. And I know you're going to remember this, but I'm in the midst of all things mom at a birthday party, which is always chaos, even when it's
smiling,
totally fine.
hosting.
Hi, thanks for coming, doing all the things. Yes. Brandon goes to pick up the pizzas and he comes back and he has 4 pizza boxes. There's 32 children, not even counting the parents. We're at a park, so you can invite everybody. And I was like, where are the rest of the pizzas? And he was like, well, this is what they handed me. Total breakdown. And so a rat. Right, that's a random assignment of a task. And I will say, Brandon, I see you in that. I don't, again, maybe. Yep. And then, because this is how I see Brandon's point of view. What if you ordered and all of a sudden he brings back 100 pizzas? Sure. And then you say to him, oh my God, everybody was bringing their own food. This was just a supplement for the few kids that I told you didn't bring their own food here. And now we have all this food to waste. And
we ordered it beforehand. I didn't choose
exactly.
But either way, it would have fallen apart because I ordered the pizza, right? And then, like you said, I threw him the rat of go pick it up. So
yes, exactly. And by the way, there are some times where there has to be a rat, but what I would say is that if you can anticipate the rat, it goes a lot better. So
here's
what you do in that, I say it exactly. I say to Seth, I know I hold the birthday card. I've ordered the food. I was gonna try to go pick it up. Time is running low. Sorry, feedback in the moment. Let's just go do this. Here's the receipt. Here's what we're supposed to order. If it doesn't look like enough, wait and get more. We can give, this is supposed to feed the entire party. Right. Even like a couple of context, clues is really helpful. But I think that's such a beautiful segue to, I was thinking about when you were talking about the giving up control, why it's not just giving up control for women, it's allowing men to forge quality relationships with their children. And so I think part of this is that we've become so complicit in our own oppression by saying things to us like, I'm a better multitasker, I'm wired differently for care, like Brandon could never see this the way I did. There's no justification. We don't task switch differently because we have a woman's brain versus a man's brain. We're the same. But I think, as one neuroscientist said to me, women have been conditioned to take pride and wiping asses and doing dishes. So that and then that's great for me because then I have more time to get tenure and for my golf game. And so it is part of the system. It's not anybody's fault that we believe these toxic messages about how we have to use our time. But I want to you're reminding me that I don't get to tell a story often, but there was a couple during the pandemic, Richard and Amy, and they, and what was interesting was that they noticed when they did the audit of the cards. So the Fair Play cards, as we've been talking about, there are 100 cards. They evolved from the Should I Do spreadsheet.
They're beautiful.
And they're in different suits. Because there are suits that are somewhat outsourceable that people say that they outsource. Those are called the home suit and the out suit. And then there's 50 cards where parents actually said these are not outsourceable. I love Alexia, our babysitter, but she's not going to decide whether my child's adenoids are being taken out.
Right.
I love Alexia, but she's really not going to go to the barber shop and give my kid, the low top fade he wants, what my son wanted or whatever. So I'm there. So I was able to see which ones were outsourceable, which weren't. But there was one card, this couple noticed in their division of the deck that Richard was actually really good at the home suit. So he was doing home maintenance, home repair, really good at dishes. But he had very little of the magic cards. And those are cards like middle of the night comfort, all the sort of intangibles, in-law management, cousins, extended family. So one card he decides to take was the magical beings card. And he says, okay, I'm going to be the tooth fairy. And so as you can imagine, the story that they tell me is that when they first start to CPE, ownership of the tooth fairy, and they come up with a minimum standard, I think of like $5, because they thought $1 was too little for inflation, but these $20 things are because you're scrambling.
Driving it up.
I know.
Driving,
we're still doing $1 and $2.
$1, yeah. So they did $5, but the $20 they're convinced is because people scramble and forget, and so they're just looking in their wallet and they don't have change.
It's true.
So they do they talk about it, but the first time that he is the tooth fairy doesn't come. And so this gets back to what you were saying, Jess, as a type A person, so this is what Amy says as a type A person that she would have done before Fair Play. And Brandon, you can tell me if this relates to you. She would have used feedback in the moment and said things all or nothing, like you've just ruined our child's childhood. Like I can never trust you again with anything for the rest of our kids' lives. I will never trust you with anything that's important. Right. So she was reflecting that that's sort of the language that she thinks she would have used when she saw her child's distress over what the heck? What happened to the tooth fairy? And what was the most interesting, though, was that Richard, he took accountability before she could say any of those things. So because he had the CPE of the card and they talked about it in advance, he said what he didn't say was, you forgot to remind me to put the $1 into the pillow, which is probably what he would have said. Mm-hmm. And so because he said something different first, which was, oh my God, my bad. I totally messed this up. Amy said that restored trust immediately because he took, accountability for his mistake. And she was able to give him some space to say yes, this is not ideal, but I'll let you carry through your mistake. And then what Richard says is he emails in front of his child, toothfairy@gmail.com. And he's like, look, I'm just going to, put this off really quick before, you have to go to COVID school or whatever. Let's just email her and be like, or hit whatever, what happened here. During the day, as he's working, he gets a response from toothfairy@gmail.com. There's somebody who mans that, woman's that email account. And it says due to COVID or supply chain issues, I'm running behind on teeth. I will be there tonight. He prints out that email, shows it to his child, and then he was the tooth fairy the next night. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah.
And I just think that in that small, but in the space that this partner gave this man to do the magic and to carry through a mistake and to take accountability, I believe that will lead to more and more shift and change in that change management, the organizational systems of that home based on just this very, very small story.
Yeah. I will say the fair play cards, and we haven't done them in a while. We've found our rhythm. We probably should do it,
Great.
once or twice a year, but I have not filled out a single school form. I have not made a single doctor's appointment. Brandon, my rule is now, listen, I got them out of my body. You can go get them shots. I don't need to be there for that. Yes. So, but those are the little things. And we're certainly not saying we're perfect and we figured it out. And there aren't times where I'm like, you said you were going to turn over the laundry, it's still life, right? It's still messy. It's still beautiful. It's still all the things, but it's definitely better.
I think what it helps. So I think what I really took from it was the, how much she thinks about things and how much that weighs on her. Because as a man, like I'm gonna speak for most men, because not all men, but we can turn our brains off. I can literally sit there and not think about anything.
I'm she's like, how is that possible? Never in my entire life has that happened to my brain.
And as a man, you need to understand that a majority of women cannot do that. And that is taxing on them, just having to think about everything. Even if it's, you are going to be the one that executes it, she's still thinking about it. And we still even sometimes are working through how to take some of that thinking about it away from her. Because even sometimes when I'm doing the task, she's still very much thinking about it. And we're still working through that. But you really need to understand that's how potentially more than likely that's how your partner, if you're in a heteronormative relationship, that's how she thinks.
But there's also times,
absolutely.
There's times where society, right? We put him as the first contact on all school forms, doctor's forms, etc. And we say, please call Brandon first. And who do they call? It's always me. They always. I'm the default, right? You said that earlier.
And drop off at the schools.
99% of the time, he's the one showing his face every single morning, and they still will call me when we've said call him. Now that's basic. That's more because of a scheduling thing. He works for himself. I don't, and so he has more availability to just pick up the phone if they needed something. But society is still making me the default, even when on every single form we explicitly say call Brandon first. And so you still have to kind of battle with those things. Like the pediatrician called a couple weeks ago and said, oh, it's time for Aston's, well check. And I said, please call my husband like the form says. Thank you so much. And she was like, oh, okay. But
we actually meant it.
We actually meant it. Please call Brandon, not me.
Absolutely. And I think that gets to what you're saying, gets to why fair play is so painful. Because if it was just another organizational system for a book or Atomic Habits for Life, right? I could sit sort of in time management and not have to address the pain of this topic. But I think what Brandon is building on is a core premise that was really how Seth changed. The way he changed wasn't just acknowledging that I'm thinking about all this cognitive labor and taking it over, which he did, and that was very important. But it was more of a fundamental premise of fair play, which I talk about, this realization that as a society, like you said, because I called schools for my research and said, why do you call women first? And it wasn't because they were the first on the contact. It was because men don't pick up. We don't want to bother him. So what that was indicating is there's this fundamental assumption in society that men's time is more valuable than women's time. And we often treat men's time as if it's diamonds, if it's finite, and we treat women's time as if it's infinite like sand. And we know this because if women enter male professions, their salaries automatically go down. We know this because health systems still today say weird things about breastfeeding, like it's free. Breastfeeding is free, even though it's an 1,800-hour-a-year job for women. But then what happens is women start internalizing these messages that society has given them. So once, they get enough schools or, metaphorical schools calling them, then we start to get this guilt and shame of, well, what am I doing wrong here? Am I out of the norm? Maybe I shouldn't be putting so much on my partner. And the way we start to live in a system like this is we start to say things like, well, I'm wired differently for care, and the time it takes me to tell Brandon what to do, I should do it myself. Yes, we're both colorectal surgeons, this one woman said, and my husband's better at focusing on one task at a time, and I can find the time. And what I kept hearing about finding time is I kept saying to women, we're not living in the space-time continuum where you can find time. there's just such a different expectation over how we're supposed to use our time. And so even when Brandon is stepping up to say, I don't want you to use your time like that, Jess. I'm going to absorb the unpaid labor and use my time, my diamond time, my valuable time to do this, to free up time for you. Society doesn't really like that. They're uncomfortable with that. And so they're going to keep pushing back on you to maybe break you, Jess and Brandon. And I see it with in-laws. I see it with cousins. I see it with schools. People don't like something that threatens what they're doing. And so you are cultural warriors, Jess and Brandon, by having a podcast, talking about the realities of marriage, doing things differently, practicing fair play. It's never going to be perfect. Saying, you know, we're going to fight today about mustard, but towels are perfect, right? I mean, life is just is hard. And it's hard on parents, and that's why we're focusing on, you know, the bigger policy change too. But you can take agency to become a partnership. And I will say that that's been the biggest change in my life was when Seth finally said to me, not, I'll take over school communication, which he did. It was, Eve, I hear you when you say that I have 3 hours after our kids go to bed to watch SportsCenter, work out, and finish my PowerPoint deck, whereas you're doing things in service of the home until your head hits the pillow 3 hours after I go to bed. I see your unpaid work, and I see that it's unfair that your time has been hijacked and chosen for you by unpaid labor in society. And I'm willing to be a partner here and take some of that off your plate. So I'm bringing that up because, Brandon, what you said was similar, which is you're not just saying to Jess, oh, fine, I'll handle laundry. What you're saying is, I see your mental load. I see that your mind and your day has been sort of hijacked by all of what society's put on you. And I'm willing to come in as a partner and take some of that off your plate. And that's probably the most generous thing that any man can do in a hetero-cisgender relationship.
Absolutely. And he knows if the dishwasher's empty, the laundry's done, guess what that leaves time for? You know? I mean, let's just be serious.
And it's true, by the way. Sex lives are better. Sex lives, relationship satisfaction. We just got our first cohort of our study back. Relationship satisfaction increases under fair play. It increases when women have less cognitive labor. Sex increases when there's more domestic fairness. It just, of course it does.
Of course. I mean,
more
it's
efficient.
So simple. Yeah.
It's sexy. You know, there's nothing more sexy for women, right, than a man who knows how to fold a towel. It's
Absolutely.
just, whoever told society that you had to be the WWE, you know, Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan version of a man. Like, the reason why society's breaking down is because no one's dating those men. Exactly. We're dating the men who fold and wash the towels and the scent-free detergent that was our minimum standard of care because our son has asthma. Yes. That is what is sexy to women.
Exactly. Yes. Listen up, guys. That's what we want more of. Absolutely.
Honestly, I think a big part of it is that I'm the household that I grew up in with a single mom, seeing her do everything. And like, I grew up with the concept like there's no such thing as a male or female chore. Like there's household chores and they need to be done. Mm-hmm. You have things, with your family that need to be done. And there's not specific gender roles that need to be assigned.
Yeah.
Right.
And now our children get to see that too. You know, we're not saying, I mean, they're still small, but we're not saying Roman, take out the trash and Aston do the inside chore. You know, like we're not doing that.
I carry everything.
You do carry
physically.
Because you're so
That's
strong.
okay.
Because you're so strong.
Yes, I do. But you know what? You're also metaphorically doing that because honestly, dealing with a school form is probably to me as heavy as a box. Filling out a school form is one of my least favorite things to do. I'd rather have like 7 root canals. So thank you, Brandon, for taking. And so actually, that's a good segue, I think, to this ending game that I wanted to play. So what this therapist that we have this whole fair place facilitators now. These therapists who have started to incorporate the gender lens and some of this unfairness to fairness conversations into their therapy, which I think has been really fun. So one of them reported back that she's using the cards a little bit in a different way. For people who aren't ready to go to them and to start assigning ownership, like Jess and Brandon were, she's doing something a little different, which gets at Brandon's original question, which is like, does your upbringing inform you? So where it does inform you is not who does what more willingly, but in terms of what I call the minimum standard of care, like what you saw sort of growing up. So I thought it would be fun to, I'll just sort of, okay, so there's a million different cards.
There are so many cards.
I'll pick one. I'll pick the one we decided earlier because of we started with that mustard thing. And I want to just, the way she uses them and what your listeners can do as a homework assignment is just pick one of the 100 cards, any of them, and just sit down with your partner on a date night or even for coffee and just ask them about their childhood memories of that card. So Brandon, I'll start with you. Let's just do groceries since we started that. We'll do full circle. Tell me what you remember about grocery shopping as a child. Do you remember anything about what stores you went to? If you went with your mother, if your siblings went, like what your refrigerator looked like? Tell me all that.
Well, obviously when we were younger, we would go because my mom was single, so she had to take us with her. She couldn't leave us at home by ourselves because we weren't old enough yet. Obviously, once I got a bit older and I can watch my brother, it's easier to shop without kids. But ours was always full because you have two boys who are playing like 3 sports. I used to always joke that like we had an extra pantry outside in the garage where it was just filled with cereal boxes. Like people come to our house and we'd have like 40 cereal boxes at one time because we'd go through one every day.
I love cereal. So you played sports, and then what was your favorite cereal?
I was a big Reese's Pieces peanut butter cups guy.
Super healthy.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, yeah, so healthy.
Well, we'll get into that because that's how I grew up too. I grew up on Lucky Charms still to this day. It's what I'm probably going to eat for lunch after this, or Cocoa Pebbles. And then do you remember what supermarket that you would go to, or do you have a sense
Kroger.
of like Kroger's? So
Right
is
around
that
the
a
corner
West
from us.
Coast? That's West Coast, right?
East Coast.
Gotta be East Coast.
Oh, East Coast. I don't remember. Yeah, Kroger's. Where was Kroger's? Where did you grow up?
North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. Yeah, maybe it's South and West because we had Pathmark and ShopRite. What about you, Jess? What do you remember about grocery shopping growing up?
That the fridge was always full. The pantry was always full. Lots of fruits and vegetables. My mom's a vegetarian. So yeah, always healthy stuff. We were the house that like never had Kool-Aid, never had soda, never had, juice was every now and then we'd have like an organic apple juice and we would have to mix it with water. I grew up in Europe originally, but so definitely not the fun food. Absolutely no Reese's peanut butter cup cereal. None of that. None of that.
Interesting. And do you remember who did the shopping for your home?
100% my mom. Yeah, definitely my mom.
So it's interesting. So you both had mothers who did the shopping. So I'm just saying, if it wasn't you, what the therapist was trying to say to people is that there's some implicit assumptions here that may sneak in if you don't address them, through a system. Like, because both of times women were the ones in the domain of grocery shopping. And then the other thing that I think is very fascinating is back to that minimum standard of care. So it could be predictably one thing. It could be that if I didn't know you, Brandon, you grew up with just, tons of cereals, processed foods. So now you want to do everything different. You want everything organic. You want your children's, food cooked. And then Jess, you could rebel and be like, I hated being that house that,
Yeah.
I hoarded, chocolate at my friend's house. I took it home in like a bag and hid it under my bed. Or you could be a household more like Seth and me, where he grew up with fruits and vegetables and a fridge, and I was a bodega eater. And so he would say to me, what the fuck? Like every meal you're giving our kids, like the only green is like a shamrock from the Lucky Charms box. Like this is dinner.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to a minimum standard of care, I think it's actually very important to understand our upbringing because I would predict maybe, again, that Jess is the one, putting apple slices, into like a nice bento box and
I am.
with, purified water. And I'm saying like, who gives a shit? Just put like a Zone bar in a brown paper bag and like, you don't need to slice the apple. Like, what is our minimum standard of care here? Right. And so I think the humor and why we're all laughing about this is because it's more fun to talk about in the past because then you can be like, oh, well, I'm predictable because I'm, the kid that grew up with cockroaches, Seth. So that's why I'm stalking you about garbage again, as opposed to, what is wrong with you? Like, do you not see it that our kids need to eat healthy? And I'm like, actually, no, I don't see that. Like, to me, processed food has fortified vitamins. I grew up with it. There's literally, I don't want to,
You're like,
I'd rather
I went to
spend my
Harvard
money
and I
on
grew up on
experiences.
Lucky Charms. Yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
exactly.
It's fine.
And for 12 years, the only thing I ever ate it for lunch was I'd go to the local store and get a toasted bagel, add steak fries in the middle, extra ketchup. So, my point being is that we assume so much about what the other person is going to see and the lens that they're going to see it with, that it really can sideline decision making in a very inefficient way. And so that's where I think even if men weren't at first receptive to the pain that they heard in my storytelling, they were receptive to the idea that, wow, if we have this minimum standard of care conversation once, then I never have to hear about this again. Garbage can just go out once a day and then I don't have to have a garbage stalker, so
Accurate.
it becomes a lot more accurate and efficient. Exactly. Yeah.
We had the garbage conversation of, I would like the garbage cans out by Monday night at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 6 because it was, oh, are you going to do it? And he's like, yeah, I was going to do it after the kids go to bed. And I'm like already stressed that it's not going to be out by tomorrow morning. And
Exactly.
And he's like, that's so excessive.
Yes.
And I'm like, that is where my mind goes. Please.
That's
get the trash out.
yes.
Yeah. So again,
yes.
I mean,
and
having
I was a garbage stalker.
Yep.
Garbage stalker, same thing, just
Get it out
would
of the
throw
house.
the extra liner bags around and just put it near his pillow. And he's like, why is there a garbage bag on my
not
pillow?
passive
I'm like, because you
aggressive
didn't
at
put the
all."
liner back in. Yeah, you didn't put the liner back in. He's like, I was about to put the liner back in. I just had to pee, It's
Right.
like,
How dare you pee?
It is.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the part of the book, well, we can end here. The part of the book where I think one of your girlfriends puts the wet laundry on the bed.
The wet laundry.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
yes.
We've all been there.
It was so funny.
It was great.
But you know what was funny about her? What was funny about her was that she said to me she doesn't communicate about domestic life. But then tells me she dumps wet clothes on her partner's pillow.
Yeah.
It's a communication.
That we all communicate
So maybe we end on that.
Yeah, everybody
We are communicating about domestic life.
Yes.
I can go on your Nest Cam today. Jess and Brandon can go on your Nest Cam today. We will see the 5 to 10 ways you've communicated about domestic life. So look at this as a shift and not a start.
Yes, absolutely love this. You have to get the book, everybody. Fair play. You have to get the cards. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, Eve, I think they're for free online where you can just print them. But these are beautiful and
Exactly.
I like beautiful things. So I bought the cards.
Yes, we're a nonprofit institute now. We're the Fair Play Policy Institute. So if anybody can't afford any of our resources, we have in the show notes, you can reach out to our team.
Perfect.
info@fairplaypolicy.org. We can provide you with any of the resources if you want to get started. We also have a lot of resources on the website that hopefully you can link to in the show notes. So we're really here to, spread the message as equitably as we can.
Thank you so much for all of the work, for helping so many, I'll just say, people feel seen, make their relationships better, stronger, sexier, all the things, because it really has impacted our lives. I talk about every single friend we have knows that we've read the book, we've got the cards, we, try to put a system in place as much as we possibly can. And so we just wanted to share this far and wide with our audience because you really have transformed how we operate in our home, and we know that others can do it too.
And honestly, all these stories I think kind of make me look better, to be honest.
They do, yeah.
Oh yes, of course they do. Well, you are wonderful, and I think again, but the reason why, like what I hear in your banter, like I said earlier, we knew that. Yeah. I mean, we know again, life is not easy, but there is a certain tenderness and trust that I see in couples who have started to understand that both of their time is valuable and they're willing to work with the other person to see it their way. And I see that in both of you. And so, like I said, I just appreciate the fact that you've devoted time in your life to do this podcast and to be cultural warriors and to push back on norms. And, we see your work and it's so, so valuable.
Thank you so much for saying that. Well, that's a perfect ending, Eve. So we'll just end there. Thank you so much for being with us today. We so appreciate you and the work that your team is doing.
Thank you so much.
Sugar Daddy Podcast, yo.